We are so happy that you are able to join us today for this really important topic. I think it's an excellent way to end SRI. So I will just begin by saying that my name is Amanda Shores, and I organized this event that you are attending today. I am on the Belmont Forum Secretariat, and I'm a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow placed at the National Science Foundation and the Geosciences Directorate. And I also want to acknowledge some of my colleagues, Megan Postema, who is another fellow, and Erica Key, who is the executive director for the Belmont Forum, who have provided wonderful support to me throughout this process and for holding this session. The Belmont Forum is the co-host for the Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress that most of you have just recently attended. And we are so happy with the outcomes that we have achieved through this conference. I feel like the shape of it is really starting to bring meaning to what we are doing here. And it's a great way, kind of a preface to start this session. And if you were just at the last plenary right now, you would have heard Adam Agar talk about how governance being a critical lever for sustainable transformation. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. So as we are closing SRI, I would like to leave us with some real world examples of how to take community-driven needs and translate that into sustainable policy actions really as a point of inspiration to go forward and make change in your own community. So we have assembled an excellent panel for you here today to discuss this topic. And actually, I know many of these panelists well because I've worked with them in the past. And my current position, if anything, has really reiterated how incredible this local work is that you all do. So I want to thank you all for being here today. In addition, I've had the pleasure of working with Laura Klein from the US Department of State. She is a geographer in the Office of Geographer and Global Issues, and she is going to be our moderator for today's event. She joined the Geographer and Global Issues Unit in 2018 as an analyst in the Humanitarian Information Unit, and continues to map as the city's COVID mitigation mapping program. So I knew Laura back when we were working on the Secondary Cities Initiative together, not that long ago, really. And so I have invited her back here today to share with us her wisdom and to help extract wisdom from all of our friends that are joining us as well. So with that, I will send it over to Laura, and thank you so much for being here, and let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, just don't. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for those that are joining us from around the world. If you're just joining, I think Amanda mentioned it earlier, but please note that we are being recorded here this morning. Or today, it's morning for me, I'm in Washington, D.C. And so, thank you, Amanda, for the opportunity to join this panel and have a chance to speak with all of our very expert panelists that you've assembled here today. I'm very much looking forward to it and really appreciate the opportunity to join the SRI event and share our experiences with this audience as well. So what really struck me about the panel topic when you sent it my way was because I'm a geographer, of course, and I think and spend so much of my time emphasizing the importance of knowing where people are, where they live, and knowing what are the key features necessary for them in their life to understand those drivers and impacts that will occur in their local communities. I know that across many disciplines, you don't have to be a geographer like myself, that academics and practitioners are recognizing the importance of the understanding at this local level or local scale as we focus on, and that this can provide some tremendous benefit and transformational impacts really to the communities there. It's really all about enabling local science-based and data-driven decision-making that can provide for transparency, for good governance, and enable planning for not only addressing the most current challenges and pressing challenges as we've seen here during the pandemic, but also enable planning for locally enabled and locally appropriate resilience and sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, as we've seen with many of our project partners around the world, thinking about in the local or in the low and mid-income level countries, it really helps me to consider a framework that the World Bank has worked and spoken on about how sustainability has 5 different facets, because you've got to consider the people that are involved, you've got to consider the appropriate technology that's being used and at this location, and then also, of course, in considering the key stakeholders here. Today, you've assembled a great set of panelists that are really going to be able to speak to this stakeholder nuance of sustainability and talking about how local engagement, including with the local government, can really create this interconnection between science and policy. I'm very fortunate in that I've had the honor and pleasure of working with 3 of our panelists here on the State Department's Secondary Cities Initiative, as well as our city's COVID mitigation mapping program, which we have ongoing right now. But I know that all of our panelists here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Dr. Barlow's experiences as well, have a lot of experiences that they'll be sharing with us today and insights which we can learn from. But really, another aspect of it, and that we've got academic practitioners here with us, both PhDs, professors, but also practitioners, is it reminds me of something that our champion, when we were standing up the Secondary Cities Initiative back in 2015, stated. Our champion is Dr. Lee Schwartz, the geographer at the United States Department of Geography. And he called academia these islands of stability within local communities, recognizing that oftentimes stakeholders at the local governments and perhaps other organizations might go through a good amount of change and turnover, but that academia is oftentimes a constant throughout that and a way to continue to promote some of these sustainability and these resilience initiatives. So I am going to start off with our 4 panelists for today. Let me introduce our first panelist, Dr. Jessica Barlow, who will provide a brief overview. All of our panelists will first provide a brief overview, and then we'll start into the questions. But Dr. Jessica Barlow is a professor at the San Diego State University, and she's the executive director of the SDSU, the university's Center for Regional Sustainability. She founded and directs the SAGE project, which partners with local government and community organizations in the greater San Diego, and Tijuana region via replication of the Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities, EPIC model. Dr. Barlow is a founding board member and currently serves as the vice president of this EPIC network. And in this capacity, she helps oversee efforts to grow the network internationally through collaboration with national and international agencies. Dr. Barlow, could you please provide an introduction for us today to your work?
Happy to. Thank you so much. Thank you also for hosting this panel and moderating as well, Laura. So again, my name is Jessica Barlow. I guess I'll talk a little bit about the EPIC network and then how I am connected through it my own university. So the EPIC network is an international nonprofit organization that unites creativity, expertise, vast capacity and resources of universities with local governments and communities in order to address specifically community identified projects. So the projects originate with the community or the city that the university partners with, and then these projects are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this model is we achieve these types of partnerships through this award-winning EPIC model that Laura just mentioned, which is a unique partnership model that allows for adaptation, innovation efforts to occur on a massive scale, but at the same time bringing value to all involved. So this not only helps communities, but also helps transform higher education and prepare our future workforce in face of complex challenges of our society. And I think that islands of sustainability expression that you said is perfect, because one constant is that the university is supplying the workforce to a great portion of a given community. And so that's something we want to keep in mind as we think about how we prepare our students in higher education. So much of our work centers around growing our network, including universities and communities from around the world to adopt and adapt this model in a local context-specific way. And we do our international expansion efforts. They've focused primarily on the global south and partner with numerous international stakeholders, and regional networks are forming in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. In my own university, we have our EPIC program called the SAGE Project at San Diego State University, and we've worked with 7 different municipalities, 4 other community organizations to address about 70 different projects in the region since 2013, including a cross-border project with the city of Tijuana, Mexico. And this has involved about 170 different classes, 30 different disciplines, over 4,000 students from across campus who are able to engage in community and place-based real-world projects to help better prepare them for the workforce and enhancing critical thinking and problem-solving skills, all the while addressing a real need in the community. I can stop there and share more later.
Great, thank you so much. Wow, quite a tremendous reach and impact of your organization, just as you mentioned there. But we'll be really looking forward to hearing more. For now, we're going to move on to Dr. Nama Budhathoki. He founded and developed the Kathmandu Living Labs as an exemplary institution working in the areas of OpenStreetMap, open data, and civic technology. In addition to the work that I've gotten to enjoy working with him on, our secondary cities program, where he's led the POCR project since 2016 and piloted our first 2C Asia Hub, and now is leading the city's COVID mitigation mapping, C2M2 Hub, in the Asia region, and 3 projects which fall under it. Before that, before founding Kathmandu Living Labs, he successfully led the World Bank's Open Cities project in Nepal during that program's founding. He currently serves as the inaugural regional director, leading Asia Pacific region's Open Mapping Hub, which is a part of a global program to put 1 billion people on the map as part of the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap program. So, Dr. Budhathoki, Nama, we would love to hear a brief introduction to your work this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for the nice introduction. Actually, this is my first SRI conference, so I'm quite excited. Thank you, Amanda, for the invitation and the opportunity to participate to this conference. My work is centered around the production and use of what we call open geospatial data. Some people call it crowdsourced mapping. We use the OpenStreetMap platform. I would say that one of the most distinguishing features of this whole thing is that every piece of data we produce is open and freely accessible to people. So I'll talk about that later. But what I would say now is that when I started KLL, I did exactly the same thing. Advancing the OSM movement in Nepal and the region, and in both in 2C and the C2M2 project. 2C was largely focused on OSM data production and uses. But C2M2 also does have that component, the open mapping component. So I would say, I'm pursuing the same line of work now at heart, as Laura said. So over the next 5 years, we want to map an area home to 1 billion people. We want to mobilize about 1 million mappers around the world in 94 countries. So I'm leading the Asia Pacific Hub, where I will be working in 25 countries. When they talk about open map, open data, I would say, because different people, different stakeholders have access to the same evidence, the map data is evidence about our geography, our reality. So I would say it helps people to develop a shared understanding about the realities. And that's something I get very excited. Technology, open geospatial data, citizen mobilization to create and use that data is the central focus of my work. So Laura, I stop there for now.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, speaks to my geographer mentality. But yes, that shared reality, I think that speaks so well to so many of our academics and practitioners. Thank you, Nama. Thank you, Nama. We'll move on to Dr. Gaston Mbonglou. I've had the opportunity of working with him with our secondary cities program, as well as now our cities COVID mitigation mapping program. And he brings a non-geographer perspective to our work. And it's been so fascinating to see and so eye-opening to see the way in which he approaches the regional partnerships that he's developed across Africa. He's a senior executive with a proven track record in business strategy, operations management, and information technology. He's a principal at the UASG Advisors and the vice president of operations for Capstone Strategy Group, a company focusing on process improvement and the use of technology to focus on and drive organizational efficiency. Prior to joining Capstone Group, Gaston has held multiple management positions at KPMG. And since 2017, he's provided strategic leadership and project oversight for our US Department of State's funded projects in Africa, starting our cities COVID mitigation mapping C2M2 hub for Africa just last summer. He's the co-author of the Accelerating Business Growth in Emerging Economies Framework, a strategy centered around capacity building through entrepreneurship programs and emerging economies. And Gaston has held the position of adjunct associate professor at the University of Maryland University College and holds a PhD and master's degree in computer science from the University of Technology in Dresden, Germany. Gaston, would you kindly share an introduction to some of your work, please?
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda, for inviting me. This is like now my first SI conference. I'm very excited to be here. And as Laura mentioned, I came into GIS from a total different world, as a consultant who happened to find out that GIS is probably the most interesting thing that we have right now, because it's all about leveraging that information to do more. So since the topic is really about how do you leverage partners to make things happen, one of the things that I did find out, be it with the secondary city that we did 2 years ago or the C2M2 project, it's really about building those key partnerships at a local level. And Dr. Barlow really mentioned it, teaming up with university, we have found it to be extremely powerful because it serves two purposes. One, they're stable, and B, it gives you resources. And C, in fact, you build capacity that didn't exist in many of the countries. I've seen it in Cameroon where when we started, most students didn't even know how to apply GIS. When we ended, we had like 50 students that were trained and that were able to find jobs. And now I continue to do multiple projects. The second thing that we really found out is going to those projects with a very well-defined goal in mind. What do you want to achieve? And by doing so, it really helps you also understand how to trigger those partners, be it the university, be it the local mayor, or whoever you're going to work with, that's going to help you facilitate the process. The third aspect is execution. As you execute, make sure you have methodology that applies to the environment where you are. I'll take a very silly example. We all know in Africa, sometimes you don't have internet connectivity. So how do you collect data in an area where there's no internet access and have good quality data? Last but not least is how do you sustain this project? Because most of the time they're funded for a certain time. But at the end of the day, how do you get some of your local partner to get something that it can continue building upon? And I'll be very excited to share about some of the strategies that we applied in many countries that are very, very successful. So on that note, I'm going to stop here and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Gaston. Really looking forward to hearing your strategies and insights. We'll move to our fourth panelist, Dr. Melinda Laituri. Proud to call her a friend and teammate for the past 5 years or so. She has been the principal investigator for our secondary cities program. She co-developed and designed that program back in 2015. She is stuck with us at the US State Department to design and come on this roller coaster that is our city's COVID mitigation mapping, as everything COVID related last summer was quite a swirl, but we got it all figured out, and it's been a tremendous opportunity that we've had over the past year to work with our 3 regional hubs, Africa, Asia represented here, and we have a hub in Latin America. Dr. Melinda Laituri is Professor Emeritus of Geography in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Sustainability at Colorado State University. She's the founding director of the Geospatial Centroid at CSU that provides support for geospatial research and teaching across the university. She's a Fulbright Scholar, having taught GIS at the University of Botswana and conducted research in the Center for Scientific Research, Indigenous Knowledge, and Innovation on participatory mapping and conservation planning. She's a visiting scientist at the Center for Geographic Analysis at Harvard University as well. She was a Jefferson Science Fellow, where I got to meet her at the State Department as she launched and became the principal investigator for the Secondary Cities Initiative. She's currently the principal investigator of our city's COVID mitigation mapping program, and she received her PhD from the University of Arizona in geography. Dr. Laiteri, Mel, we'd love to hear some introductory remarks from you as well, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura, and thanks for that very generous introduction. I've had the pleasure to work with Laura and Mama and Gaston, and I'm so excited to meet Jessica on this panel. Jessica, I want to work with you. You're right in alignment with so much of the stuff that we work on with respect to secondary cities and the COVID project we're now working on. The aim of these projects is to do what we call participatory mapping around the world. And as Nama mentioned, and as Gaston mentioned, really looking at how we can partner with universities, get skills into these young people's hands so that they can be working with local government to address critical issues in their areas. We are essentially training the future leaders of tomorrow. And that's where this investment is so important and so exciting, because these young people are so amazing to work with. They just really give you hope and belief in the future that everything's going to work out and be okay. We make sure that we partner not only with universities, but also with small local NGOs and local governments to address issues. And our emphasis is on undermapped and underexamined urban areas. Hence this idea of focusing on secondary cities, cities that are not mega cities, are not the capitals in most of the countries we work in, but are these places that need data, need information. And we've learned that digital data is powerful. Digital data gives voice to local communities. And so how can we get these tools into their hands so that they can address the critical problems in their own backyard? We also make sure that we use appropriate technology. As Gaston mentioned, we're working in places that have low bandwidth, that might not even have access to internet capacity. And so how can we identify the appropriate tools in the appropriate places? That's so important to do. And also it's changing every day. These places are so innovative with respect to finding how to make things work with very little. And that's a huge lesson for big funders to learn and to understand that small projects can have big impacts and big results. So with that, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Laiteri. So we've got a series of questions we put forth to our panelists ahead of time. And I think our audience probably wants to know, how do I get started? Because it's such tremendous examples of success that have been shared with us already in these introductions. So I want to throw out the first couple of questions on how does one establish these relationships effectively, and what are some of the key participants, the key roles that they fill within their community? And for this, I'd love to hear from Dr. Barlow and Dr. Budhathoki, if I can put you two on the spot to get us started and tell us how to set ourselves up for success.
Sure, happy to share. So the model that I'm describing typically is a partnership between the university and a local municipality, a city, although certainly NGOs end up being involved and sometimes might even be formally part of the partnership. And I think the best way to start is by building on an existing relationship. If there's somebody already at the university who is well connected to someone in the city, that's a place to start. And if it's a city manager type of government, or it would be best to connect with the city manager's office or that equivalent, the kind of CEO of the city. And something that is as large scale as this model, this EPIC model that I've described, there needs to be a main liaison on each side of the relationship, university, a program manager on the university side, and someone from the city manager's office on the city side. And you really do need buy-in from the city manager, but also blessing of the city council, even though you're not usually working directly with council, except for maybe opportunities for celebration, for example, or if they need to approve an agreement, something like that. And so sometimes there's a professor at the university who's already been collaborating with a city staff person. And in other cases, there may be alumni of the university working in a local government. Even when you start from scratch, though, it should be a sort of slow courtship to build trust over time. So the trust, I can't emphasize that enough. It can sometimes take a few years to get that kind of trust built and launch a partnership. And in other cases, the city might want to jump in right away. But what's most important is that the partnership involve projects that are high priority for the city and the community. So, for example, already part of the work plans, and that they not be political, because then you run that risk if the partnership relies on engagement from elected officials. And so again, there'd be this very strong foundation of trust between the two partners. And the city government really needs to know that everyone is on the same page and on the same side and wants to succeed in the same way. So this means spending a lot of time and effort managing expectations, making sure that regular, sometimes daily communication is occurring. And something simple as an example of how to build that relationship and that trust. Anytime at my university, for example, we have done a press release about a given partnership with a local city, we always send a draft of that to the city first and just say, so that someone in the city manager's office can review it for accuracy, any potential public relations concerns. That tiny little gesture goes a really long way in showing them that we are in a true collaboration and that we care about the partnership and its impact on the community, to make sure that it's a success.
Thank you, Laura. That's a great question. What I would like to mention at the beginning is sometimes we have an assumption that these local government units are homogeneous, which is not the case. When I asked that question, Laura, I was thinking about many municipal government. I've either worked with them directly or have some tangential conversation. They're different. So the rural versus urban, there are a variety of factors that make them different. And also the kind of a leadership, in some municipalities, the mayors they're proactive, they have different preferences, their visions are different than the other municipalities. And these institutions also do have, deep local dynamics, so although it's small, because the fact, given the fact that they're close to the citizens, they're influenced by a number of things. And as a result, their motivations sometimes are different. So I bring this up because sometimes we try to, think about the more simplistic way. We do have a set of idea, that may have worked on local government, but that, may not necessarily work in other local government, for example. So I'm just trying to highlight the complexities, that's inherent, number one. And number two is, let me put it this way. We come from science, evidence, research perspective with a very good intent. But how do you communicate these things? Because these people, mayor, for example, they are coming from very different background. Their language is different. The way they think is very different than we think. So we assume that when we do have evidence, we do have data, the municipality will readily use it. That's not the case. The first question is, do local government always use evidence to take their decision? That's how we think. If there is evidence, that's a good thing. But I think they do not always take their decisions that way, from my experience. So that said, I'm just reflecting some of my experience and sharing. That's it. Coming back to your question, how do we start our relationship? My experience is that within the municipality there are few people. They're either influential within the institution. They enjoy respect because of knowledge or other things. They have network, they have knowledge. So I think it's probably a good idea to get connected to them. And then these people might be very helpful. Again, in some municipality, it could be an engineer. Other municipality, it could be even sometimes a secretary to the mayor. And again, it depends. So that's how we did when we had to work in Pokhara. Remember, the Pokhara is that's a city which is 200 kilometers away from our office in Kathmandu. But we think, we do not have a sufficient contextual information about the municipality. That's why we moved our team there permanently for a couple of years. Just 200 kilometers, we speak same language, it's our country, but still, we did not have enough confidence that we understand the municipality fully. So we started with, trying to identify some of the people, observing, trying to map the dynamics within the municipality, identify the right person, and get entry. So that's how we try to establish our relationship. There are other part of the story. I hope you have other questions, then I will be happy to jump in later.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Barlow and Dr. Budhathoki. Yeah, I think it's so important, as you mentioned, Jessica, on building that trust and sustaining that, managing expectations and constant communication. And coming from the government side, it just warms my heart to hear you speak of the coordination ahead of communications, even something as small as a tweet or something that just pops out on social media. We all, with this digital world, we're also concerned with our branding and acknowledging people. And we recognize that everybody's got personalities, that we don't want to offend anyone or come across any sensitivities. So, and Dr. Budhathoki, remembering that not one size fits all and one process fits every situation, and that local context is so important. I really appreciate your focus on that. So I want to move on, and I'm going to ask Gaston and Melinda to share their thoughts with us. But a couple of the questions that we had were looking at bridging that gap and connecting the community and the local government together around sustainable solutions. So as you suggested, Nama, perhaps evidence-based decision-making isn't necessarily the way that things are being done as you start a project, but how do you build a community and build community support and local government stakeholder support for that? And then also, Gaston and Melinda, if you'd share with us perhaps some key networking activities that you've engaged in your communities, and something that you've found helped and really worked in those communities. I know, as Melinda spoke out just at the beginning, that things have changed so much and there's so much innovation at local communities. And even here during the pandemic, I know that communication styles and partnership engagement activities have a different look and feel to it. But what are some great examples that you could share with us? And Dr. Mbonglou, I'll ask you to start, if you would, please.
Thank you so much, Laura, for the question. So how do you build support? I would like to go back to what Dr. Barlow said early on with regard to the university and the connection, and I did bring it up. So one of the things that we do as we go into this project is to strategically look at which part of the university is best suited to work with you. I'll take the example of the secondary city project in Douala. The team that we work with did oceanography. So they already did a lot of mapping, and they were extremely critical in understanding the mangroves and mapping that, in general. However, the city of Douala didn't even know they existed and what it can do for them. On another side, as we talk to the mayor, and now I would like to fast forward on the C2M2 project, there's a new mayor. His key topic is how do I make healthcare accessible to everybody in the city? So as you start looking at those type of connections, okay, somebody has a knowledge, somebody has a need. How do you bridge them together? That is where GIS comes in. So, okay, you know what? We can really help you map all your healthcare facilities in the country so that everybody knows how to quickly get access to the doctor. And by the way, give you more information than what you have. And interesting enough, what we find out is they have been collecting data for years, but they never use that data. Going back to Nama's point about evidence-based. So we had to find a way to say, let's just visualize that information for you, and let's work together and see how we can present it, to people that can consume the data. And that takes you now to the next question you asked about the type of activities that you do. So as you collect data on healthcare, definitely you had to engage the different doctors in the city. But the whole idea is the doctor is going to give you the data, and his question is, what is that giving me? As you said, you do some mapathons where they can come and see the data that was collected and realize, oh, this is not the picture of my clinic. My picture is much better. Oh, guess what? You can own it. You can update that picture and going forward, see the value. So those are very tangible examples where you can really engage people with things that matter to them. When I look at Pemba, for example, in Mozambique, where we're doing the C2M2 project, we teamed there with the Department of Economy. One will ask the question, why? So when you look at second order impact of COVID-19, one of the key areas is how does that impact the local economy? They already had a set of data that was critical for that discussion. So it was easy for them to link us with the local mayor and some of the local NGO to say, how do we collect that information and how do we quantify that information to really show the second order impact of COVID-19 on the economical level? So I think those are two key strategies: understanding what matters to your local partners and making sure that you always close the loop and come back and show what you have collected so that they see the value why they did engage you. So back to you, Laura. Thanks.
I'll pass it right on to Dr. Laiteri. Any thoughts about techniques for inspiring engagement and or building stakeholder value?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, and thanks for the responses from our other panelists. I have a couple of things to comment on. One thing that made the Secondary Cities project so successful was how we gained entree into the communities we worked with. And we work closely with the US embassies all around the world that have people that are close to what's going on there. They know the NGOs, they know the universities, they know the different groups of people and kind of what the pulse of the city is where we decided to work. And so they were able to provide entree into communities in a way that if I was just going in there, I would not have that kind of connection. So that was hugely valuable to take advantage of that local expertise granted by the US embassies. The second piece was they helped us to identify what we call our local champion in all of these different areas. So, and two of my champions are here right now, Gaston and Nama, who became our local champions to facilitate projects one in Douala, Cameroon, and one in Pokhara, Nepal, where they were able to facilitate our activities there and build a very strong foundation for the kinds of participatory mapping activities that we were charged with doing. The third thing that came out of this was after I went to all of the different cities and did scoping trips to meet people and actually put a face to a name, people knew who I was to be able to facilitate this process and be able to build on this. We did a series of technical exchanges with our different regional partners because we had these projects all over the world, some in Asia, some in Africa, some in Latin America. We hosted technical changes by region where we brought all of the partners together to learn from each other, to share the approaches they were doing, to be able to think about how they might start to leverage their network in these regions to build something that could be sustainable. That was the key word, sustainability of these projects. So that came out of it. And what we discovered is this is indeed sustainable because from the Secondary Cities project that ended in 2019, we now have the COVID mapping project that is taking place, and we were able to build on the foundation of the Secondary Cities project to have these 3 regional hubs now that are doing participatory mapping, looking at the impacts of COVID in different areas around the world in these different regions. What was so valuable about Secondary Cities was being able to do these in place and for us all to get together and go there. COVID shut all that down. Suddenly we're in this virtual environment and we're starting to realize that, we could facilitate this project in this virtual world and it's working. It's very exciting to see the success that's coming out of the COVID mapping project, despite the challenges of COVID, and being able to build on this technology. And yes, we're all incredibly Zoom fatigued, and we're tired of all of this, but I think we're demonstrating that we can make this happen. And that's what's so exciting about this. So with that, I'll leave it there.
And Dr. Barlow, Dr. Laiteri mentioned the model and kind of our way of entry into the community, but I know EPIC has a slightly different model, and I know you're discussing how EPIC is expanding to international partnerships. So wondered if you'd share some of your insights and experience as EPIC is scaling to much larger proportions as a program and model, please.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So we have a sort of what we call a radically simple question to describe our model, and that is in a sort of where the model came from, which was at the University of Oregon about 10 years ago. And it's simply, what if we could connect existing university instructors teaching existing courses with existing projects in a community, and do so at a scale that magnifies value for all. That's our sort of mantra. And so we call it radically simple because these are things that already exist. They are already part of the university, a university instructor's teaching load. These are students that are already taking these classes. These are projects that already exist in the community and are high priority for the city or the community. And why not just match those things together? Since we have all this capacity in the form of students at a university, we have all these needs on the community side. And that's something that we can do around the world. And the model, we have this EPIC model it's been spreading across the US, but now into sub-Saharan Africa. We've done a few training workshops in Southeast Asia, the most recent one just a couple weeks ago. So regional networks are forming to implement this model. And I think what's most exciting about the model is that it is adoptable and adaptable in different regions for different types of partnerships, different types of communities. And so it's a general framework of mapping courses with projects, but it can be done in a way that is appropriate for local contexts. So we just share the model, say, here's how we do it. I'm sure it can work in your region too, but you figure out what's best for your region and your community and your local cultural geographic context. And so we describe the model, but then let universities develop their own partnerships and their own relationships and their own projects in partnership with local communities in a way that's relevant to that context. So we very much try to avoid a sort of top-down, this is how you should do it, in North American Western context. It's like, we have this great model. We think it works everywhere. And why don't you try it out and let us know? And then we all learn from each other.
Well, we look forward to hearing how it goes. I think that's a great opportunity and a great example, and keeping it a simple message can go a long way and really can translate and be adaptable, as you suggested. Nama, if I can ask you to elaborate a little bit further, in bringing communities together and bringing partners together and engaging, mapping, I've found people always want to put themselves up on the map and they want to engage in that regard. I wondered if you had any examples of key engagement activities or way engaging in your community that you'd like to share, and how crowdsourced mapping or some of the other civic technology and the other tools which you and your team use are really bringing together. I mean, now, as you've said, 25 countries that you're looking to engage across here as the hub is the Open Mapping Hub is standing up here this year. Thank you.
Again, thanks for the question, Laura. So the exciting thing about mapping is that is visual, as we all know. I think most of the people, from geography, that's my assumption. But my work largely focuses on the engagement of the young people in mapping. So one of the things we have learned is that we only talk about mapping. So in open mapping, for example, hey, we give training, hey, come and start mapping your communities. That's great. So we started with that conception as a predominant conception. So bring people, give mapping training, we call Mapathon in OpenSHMAP, with the expectation that they will begin to map their community. But over the time, what we learn is that the young people, they're at a very different level of their career trajectory. They're in universities, or probably just graduated, they're looking for a job, they're trying to develop their skills. And we quickly learn about that. And then we change our model, So instead of just talking about mapping, what about if we include 60-70% of material about open mapping, and then maybe 20-30% material on other skills that they're centrally interested to develop? For example, things, even simple things like how to write a resume, how to communicate effectively, how to give a presentation, how to even to apply to graduate school. And when we changed that worked pretty well. So they're actually, very interested in some of these things. So the engagement actually went up. Otherwise, you just ask them to map. In open mapping, in many cases, they map remotely, traces the satellite imagery to create road networks or building footprints, or to create other geography features. So that's one of the learnings we have. Again, trying to understand people's motivations. What are the things they need? Instead of just going from our one predominant idea. So that's that help for a more sustained engagement. And the second thing is, young people can massively learn from mapping. So let me give you an example. We did have a program called what you call a DIAL, Digital Internship and Leadership Program. So that's an internship program, is 3 months long. And then when they had to map the remote Nepal, some of these people have never left Kathmandu Valley, for example. The Nepal's, the countryside, sometimes you don't have access to road, or even if a road, the roads are like this, And then we used to challenge them, at the end of the mapping, they had to reflect deeply, what did they learn, and then present, think, write, communicate. And then some of them said, oh, I never thought, there's a small, there's a house in the village. In some of the villages in Nepal, there are only a couple of houses in a big area. And then sometimes the road just goes, there's a very lots of twists. And for them was massive learning, and they got surprised. And they begin to think, oh, how difficult it is for these people, to get to the markets, city center. I found that fascinating. I'm talking about the remote mapping. Imagine if we could send them to the villages in person, physically. And then, it all depends upon how we structure training, learning, materials. So some people have said, I've been walking here for the last 5 years, but I never noticed these things, at a temple or a mosque or gumbas. This is the first time I've noticed it, because mapping challenges you to consciously observe the surface of the earth, and you begin to see things that you haven't seen, you didn't see before. So if we want to enhance engagement of the people, I think we need to have some tricks and some of those things. So these are a couple of learnings we have, and they have. I find these very fascinating. So then we can connect mapping to a variety of things. We come from a geospatial domain, and we just our focus is on point lines, polygons, geospatial analysis, visualization, map. But how can you connect maps to other facets of the society? Once people begin to observe, potholes on the street, for example, if we challenge them to map that, and they begin to ask questions, who is responsible, who is accountable, to repair some of these things, It gets connected to governance, to, political leaders, to authorities, it opens up a variety of interesting questions for these people to explore. So I'm very interested, to embed some of these things, in mapping when you talk about engagement.
Thank you, Nama. I always appreciate these insights and these anecdotes, and it's so illuminating for me to think about that student that using their remote map was able to recognize and start to inquire what it was like for someone living in these communities. Of course, stories are a great way to really engage people with the work that we're doing. But we recognize that with funders and others being involved, often there is a need for trying to create some sort of measurement of success or measurement of engagement. You already started speaking to lessons learned, and I'm going to turn to Dr. Laituri, Melinda. I know we have plenty of lessons learned over our years of work together with secondary cities and C2M2. But Mel, would you like to share some ways in which you've considered or we consider programs and measure the success of some of the work that we're doing, kind of from a broad programmatic level? And then I'm going to ask each of our other panelists to speak more to kind of the project levels or the regional levels in which they're a bit more focused on.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for that hard question. Let me think a little bit about this, and we've learned, like you said, we've learned lots of lessons, and we have lots of direction with respect to what are the metrics of success. And so oftentimes in a government environment, metrics of success are very specific. How much data did you collect? How many people came to your workshop? Were there men and women? What were their ages? What was their educational background? So all of these kinds of things that are very specific, to be able to put together a nice set of graphs or charts to demonstrate that, yeah, we did some stuff on the ground. I think in retrospect and thinking about these projects, there's so much more that goes on that those metrics do not capture. It gets back to this idea of, what's in a number. A number is so important, and you unpack that number, and there's so much you can learn from it. So thinking about the number of relationships that have been established, number of partnerships that have been created, the kinds of networks that are undertaken, all of these things are intangible and have all kinds of things that come out of them. And if we didn't do them, they wouldn't happen. So I think another tangible metric is how many students go on to higher education. We've got a kind of these pipelines that have been created across these different institutions where suddenly we're having students be very interested in geospatial science. They want to get a degree in that, or they want to get a degree in planning, or they want to just get a degree and be able to actually have an entree into the local government. So there's all kinds of spillover effects that start to happen that are not easily tracked or measured and that are so important. The other thing, the big thing, and I alluded to this earlier, the big lesson that I come away from these projects with is these projects are not very expensive. They're anywhere from $80,000 to $200,000 over a 2-year period, something like that. That's not very much money, but that's such an investment and it goes so far and there's so much that gets done. So we're not talking about multi-million-dollar budgets here. We're talking about little buckets of money that can make a huge impact in the kinds of places we're working. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the model we want to keep doing, but I think that's something to reflect upon and think about, again, the ability of our local partners to be so innovative and to figure out ways to make things work and to facilitate this kind of activity. This is the unsung side of these kinds of projects that are so valuable. So with that, I'll leave it there.
Well, I'll ask Dr. Gaston Mbonglou to share with us some of his insights coming from this entrepreneurial and this economic framework. What are some examples or measurements of success that you consider in looking at a successful community or local government engagement? And or, is there something that's missed in the numbers, as Dr. Laiteri spoke to?
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. I think I would like to build on what Melinda just mentioned. I'm looking at success from 3 different angles. One is from the people that are funding the project, and I think Melinda clearly defined some of their success criteria. But going back to that whole notion of partnership with some of the local partners, one of the things as they go into those projects is that they also have their typical goal they want to achieve. I want to take the healthcare and COVID-19 as an example. As we started doing the data collection, one of the areas that almost every single country was looking at was healthcare. And we understand healthcare capacity is a challenge, regardless what country you go. But through the data collection, we can now tell you in most of the cities how many doctors, by gender, by hospital, and even the hospital capacity. So what it means is when they have the next pandemic coming in, they know exactly where's the hospital located, what capacity do I have, what do I have to build on. That is something that is important to the mayor, where they say, okay, I like all the other things that you're measuring, but this is going to be something for me as I make decision, even on investment, from an investment perspective. Where do we have to invest next in order to make sure that as the next pandemic hits, we know what it means. The second success criteria I'm looking at is always sustainability for your local partners, because most of the time, again, the project comes, they're looking for funding. If no other project comes to the funding, what happens is there's a knowledge gap until the next project comes around. So how do you build an infrastructure that can help them sustain themselves? And one of the things that we did from starting in Douala was to say, how do we put some technology at the hand of students and some of the local partners that it can use and continuously feed that technology with data so that they can continue what they do. Let's take the example of healthcare. If I can continue doing some of the mapathon to continue to update how many doctors do I have, how many nurses do I have. So I'm strengthening my resiliency from a healthcare perspective. So that is really where, as I look at success, it's really about the funding source. What do they want to achieve? That is key. The second one is really how do you enable the local partners and see how do you empower and enable students so they see a future in what you do. And I want to bring an illustration in this case. As you all know, we met a very young student from the Open City project in Ghana. That was one of the, the event that we have at the end of the project. Interesting enough, he has defined the methodology for Pemba, Bukavu, as well as Kenya on data collection, data cleansing, and how to drive value out of the data. And again, this is how you really empower some of the local teams and make sure they see a path to the future. So thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Gaston. Moving to Dr. Barlow, would you share with us some thoughts on what success looks like, and or if there are items that aren't able to be measured but still just as important?
Yes, happy to. I particularly liked what the examples that have already been shared. I wanted to sort of repeat or reiterate a number of things. Impact on students is huge, and sometimes are not measurable because it's more stories. I've met several students who've said, I want to be a city manager, and that's not usually something that people go into school with a goal to do, but they learn about how cities work, and they get excited about local government in a way, through these types of partnerships, in a way that I think other types of experiences for students wouldn't allow for. And cost also typically is, we always say that cities need to have skin in the game, as we say, to be invested in the outcome, so that they are contributing as much time and effort to the success of the partnership as the university is. And sorry about my cat. But it can't be prohibitive to the city either. So they have to just invest just enough. And usually it's not very much money, but the impact is great. So one of our city partners described the partnership as an 800% return on their investment. Another city partner invested about $25,000 in a wayfinding project that we did for them. So we do a lot of GIS mapping too, through our projects, not to be left out from the rest of the group. And they were able to get over $1 million in grants to develop their wayfinding system. In other ways, though, it's measuring success can be difficult, because while the official partnership might end after a year or so, the impact of this collaboration may last many years into the future. Sometimes it could be several years for students' ideas to be implemented, especially if we're talking about planning or zoning changes. In other cases, though, it might be the ongoing, long-lasting relationships that are established that over time continue and build trust and a sense of community between the city and the community and the university and students. And I mean, we still have ways that we measure or attempt to evaluate success. We have a series of surveys that we do through participating EPIC programs to evaluate impact on students, instructors, and the city. We do regular follow-ups. So a given university program will do regular follow-ups or check-ins with the city partner every year following the partnership, just to check in, see if progress has been made on the projects and so on. But we find most of the time that the successes are shared through stories. People resonate most with those, but that's where we see the real kind of impact is that at this sort of community level, storytelling level.
Thank you. I think we've got about 5-10 minutes left for kind of this question discussion section here. But I wanted to turn back to Nama with our final question. Any thoughts that you have on, measurement for success, but also then what might not be captured in those measurements? And quickly, if you can summarize kind of what is the most important outcome or result of a project that was intended or unintentional that you found?
I find that extremely interesting, but also very challenging question. What should we measure as? When we start a project, we start with certain goals, certain objectives. Of course, we do have our interest to measure that. But should we measure the outcome, the product, or should we measure the process? Should we measure what we originally anticipated to accomplish, or should we measure something that emerged? And sometimes these are more important than, as Mel hinted. So let me give an example. I brought this map book, and some of you have already seen it. So and there is a story. So this is a simple map book with a number of, for geographer, it's nothing for you and me, very simple. But this is something we had not thought when we started the second cities project. When we started the project, we wanted to map the city, produce digital data, and hand over this data to the city government, put it on the open platform. That was our goal. But we're thinking very digital. But on the process, we learned that the municipality and the mayors are actually more interested in something physical, not just digital. Oh, yeah, this is something we didn't think about. And then we designed this map book, we produced it, we designed it and passed it to them, and they actually produced, they printed it in 500 copies in the first lot and shared it to Council of Ministers. Something you and I don't value, they value a lot. And this is exactly what I'm saying. We really don't understand what they need, their priorities. And they shared it to the cabinet, to the ministers, to send it to different other government organizations. They're very proud, So, but this is not a piece that we originally planned or we were going to measure as part of the success. I think we should be open to some of these things. By the way, the second city was designed in a very different way. It was very welcoming to those new situations, new ideas, and that's probably one of the reasons that the project was successful. I hope Mel agrees with that. In many projects, you're very, you fixed. You just look at these three things. I would say, so we need to keep ourselves very open to that, and otherwise we kill innovation, we kill new ideas. That's not good. The measure of success, again, is difficult. We also did second series project in India, in the city of Indore, by the way. We started with similar mindset, but the project, took a slightly different path. So I would say some of these tangible outcomes, whether we define that at the beginning of the project or that emerged during the project. And also there are some other things, the capacity, the trust, And another thing is in these projects, the people, we introduced them OpenStreetMap map. They hadn't even heard when we started the project, but now I see some of them have got a full-time job in WSM, some of them are doing PhDs, around the same area. And that's, we should definitely measure these things probably, but again, we did not expect these outcomes. So again, Laura, these are my, experience. I don't know if this is the last
Thank
question.
you.
What are you looking for? Again, I think we should measure both product and the process, original goals, and also emergent, new, interesting things.
Absolutely. And Gaston, you didn't come in with a geography perspective. What surprised you? What outcomes would you consider the most important outcome and result of your work? Give us your perspective here.
I think for me, the major outcome was really, from a business perspective, a lot of hidden opportunities that we didn't think about. And I'll give you a very interesting example how geospatial data has shaped a total new avenue of what we can do. So as we were doing the project in Africa, one of the things that we found out is, we talked with some people at the CDC, working with the CDC. They told us about the last mile for vaccination. I didn't know that was an issue. But what happens is let's look at the COVAX vaccination program that's going on right now. People get 400,000 vaccine in the country. How do you know that the vaccine that got to the main city are going to go to the local people in the most remote places? By using geospatial data, you can map every single location where the vaccine, the whole supply chain of vaccination, but also map it all the way up. So as you start using geospatial data, you realize how much opportunity exists out there that you can expose yourself and all the people working with you. And for me, that is one of the greatest outcomes, because right now I'm talking about, last mile vaccination tracking, not just in Africa, but also with some of the local municipalities in the US that really see the value of using geospatial data to track things that are critical on the local level. So that was one of the major lessons learned from us. In addition to helping people in some of the emerging countries, how do you also bring it back here and close gaps in some of the cities that might have similar challenges?
Thank you. I'll pass it to Dr. Barlow. Your programs focus on sustainability and resilience, and I know that's a key interest for our audience here. What are some of the most important outcomes and results that you've seen? Are these the intended, the unintended? How did this surprise you in its development?
So I think some of them are not necessarily unintended, but sort of indirect. So we have projects that we identified, and I think this actually gets a little bit to one of the questions in the chat. That is, the projects that we work on through these partnerships are projects identified by the city partner that are already part of their work plans, already part of their budget. So it's not, they're not doing charity work to the university. They're actually saying, we need help with these projects. And then we connect them with faculty and students. And so the projects come from the community, we assume, because the city is responding to community needs. But oftentimes the community that is the community members that are most vocal or most heard are the ones that have the most power in the community. And so it's a majority population and so oftentimes underrepresented community members are not heard, either because of linguistic barriers, cultural barriers, trust barriers, or a combination of all of those things. And so one of the things that the model really does, because students are out in the community trying to address these projects, they're going and speaking with community members, especially the underrepresented ones, because sometimes these students are from the very communities that they are working with. So these are local students in local communities who may already know the language, may already know the cultural differences between better represented community members or in neighborhoods than others. And so the city ends up getting the perspective and hearing the voices of people who often are marginalized. And I think that's one of the huge successes and outcomes of a partnership like this. The students are going to find the community members, whether the city wants them to or not. And they're going to also find the community organizations, the NGOs, and connect with them as well. So in addition to the stated goals of these partnerships that involve, tackling the specific project that the city has identified as high priority, they're getting also a multidisciplinary approach to to that project, and getting a lot of different voices contributing to that. And that makes hopefully the community feel better represented overall. So that's one of the big ones, in addition to some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to ask Dr. Laituri, what's the one most important outcome or result? But then I'll turn it over to Amanda Shores to grab some of our audience questions as well. So Mel, you first, please.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone for all your comments. Just to kind of reiterate a couple of different things that were the outcomes of a Secondary Cities project. almost all of our city partners created a map book, such as Nama just shared with you, that had not ever existed before. So be able to create a map for a city that needed that kind of data and information was quite amazing. Many of our projects created mobile apps where the community could use that app to enter information and continue to build on this digital database, even in very challenging areas with respect to technology and things like that. And that was success. Third thing that came out of the project were data portals. Some of our projects had individual data portals that they added to the local government. We created a data portal for all of the projects to post their data on so that it could be discovered, shared, and accessed, made available. And fourth, many of our projects also created story maps to start to tell stories about what had gone on there and the results of some of these activities that had happened. We found that we had identified islands of sustainability through our local champions and through our partnerships that were created. And in some respects, I'm going to say something here. In some respects, our local governments were the weakest link. And because they were that, and I'll tell you why, because local governments are exposed to the political machinations that exist within where they operate. They are voted out of office. You have large turnover in many of the local governments. We would train up people in other projects that I worked on, and they would get snapped up by an NGO because of their skill set. So you have this huge turnover in local government, and the challenge to be able to assist them by the community is huge. And so this is not just a good story about a lot of positive things that happen. It's something where we need to build on these relationships and determine ways that local communities can work effectively with local government. And what does that mean for the long-term investment and for being able to transcend some of the problems that our local governments have that we partner with. So the change that happens is incremental. It's a little bit at a time. And that's kind of where we are with this. And with that, I'll leave it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laiteri. Amanda, have we any questions from the audience that you pick out for us, please?
Yes, we do have one question that we can use to kick us off. And this is from, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Zainab. And they're asking, I have seen that several times the whole bureaucratic system works from a top to bottom approach, whereas the communities are more participatory and bottom up. How do you guys overcome these barriers? Would anyone like to address that question? That's a toughie. Jessica, you look like you might have something to say there.
Well, and it's related to what I just mentioned before is that sometimes community members may feel that there's a disconnect between what the city is prioritizing and what is a priority for them. And so by engaging more community members in the kinds of projects that might be tackled through a partnership like I'm describing, but any kind of partnership, the community members are going to feel that they have a voice and maybe can better influence the direction that the city takes on projects and initiatives. So the city, ideally is responding to the needs of the community, but as I mentioned, not everyone's voices are heard. And by getting more people out there, so just increasing capacity for the city in the form of having, in a given year, sometimes over 500 students working on these projects, they are going out into the community, interviewing, surveying, collecting data, coming up with results, designed solutions, recommendations based on the input of a larger number of the community, or larger representation of the community than the city would ever have even the capacity to do. Because again, we also are typically working with smaller cities that have limited capacity in terms of staff. That allows the city to perhaps also be better informed by the community members. And so you can incorporate a little bit of that bottom-up approach into how the city moves forward on projects.
I would like also to add, if you allow me, another aspect. So as you go to the cities, one of the things that we have found successful is to engage city council, because very often city council represent the different part of the city. And as you engage city council, make sure that you also break up the project by district. So let's assume it's a big city, has 10 different districts, do one district at a time, and make sure that you align your goal and strategies to what matters the most to those people. That's extremely important. You know, if you can do those things, have a city council with you and make sure that you can break the project in chunks, you know, what district at a time. It makes it easy to get the involvement from the bottom, you know, versus the top-down approach that's very often quite difficult to manage.
I would like to open the floor. Do we have any other questions in the group? Don't feel shy. I have a bunch, so if we don't have any, I can pull some out of the bank. Okay, so here's a question for you, and you sort of already addressed this a little bit, but I am wondering what you do specifically to convince lawmakers in city municipalities to use information to make decisions. So this is something you touched on earlier, Gaston, which is that, you know, policies aren't always being driven by data and by information. And so what are the critical needs we have in order to convince lawmakers that we have this information available, it can help inform your problem, you should use it? You know, what do you think about that?
It is a very interesting dance, that's where I put it, because, you know, most of in many cities, city officials are either appointed by government or their local politicians. Somehow there's always a political game behind the scene. So you have to tread that very carefully, because on the one side, you need their support in order to be successful, but you also want to distance yourself from politics, otherwise they'll have that perception. That is where you really have to have a discussion with them to say, okay, looking at your agenda, what is key for you? You know, what is key for you that's going to impact the people? That's why I did take the example of access to healthcare, because that is something everybody can relate to. You know, everybody wants to see the doctor, they want to know where the doctor is, they want to understand what are the costs, and trying to use that type of strategy to make sure that you can convince them to join you with your special data. And funny enough, as Nama mentioned earlier, a lot of them don't even know, you know, that you can see your hospital on the map. But if the first time they see, oh, wow, this is amazing. So I can see it everywhere. Somebody can update it in my office. This is great. You know, those type of little example really make a huge difference. But key is to understand the strategy and see what can work best with what you're trying to achieve.
Erica, I think you had a question. I just want to quickly, I introduced Erica before you got here this morning, but Erica is the executive director for the Belmont Forum and a huge source of support for me and for today's event. So let's hear what your question is, Erica.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And this is an amazing event. And I apologize, we ran over a little and that's why I was late. But, you know, I live in an area where election overturn is just a common factor, whether it's at the local level, at the federal level. And it is a strongly destabilizing factor of life. So I'm just thinking about institutional memory within communities and cities, and who might be that memory for this activity if the governments themselves are volatile, and are there sort of the equivalent of librarians that may not be poached by NGOs or others, but are deeply rooted in the communities that can be that tie and that can, you know, influence them, those around them to make it more than just a handful of people that are knowledgeable the mapping and the vision, I would say, that this activity has.
I'll take a shot at that. Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think that that's kind of one of the key issues with these kinds of projects. And there's no magic bullet for this. And there's no key individual that's going to be the point person on every single project to make that happen. So it's where has the investment been made and how do we continue to facilitate that very sensitive area of continuity with this. The issue of sustainability is huge for these kinds of projects. So I go back again to looking at the university as these islands of stability. That's one place where there can be continuity. However, strong local leadership who have an investment in making sure that these projects continue are also quite critical. And I'd say that someone like Nama, who lives in Kathmandu and is facilitating these amazing projects across Asia, is quite important in making this also continue. So again, a strong local leader that can make these things happen are very important. I think the other aspect in terms of institutional continuity is what is being mapped and what does it serve for the city. So our secondary cities project focused on emergency preparedness, the ability to create data that would help cities manage things in times of natural disaster, and having that kind of data and to be able to analyze that to create safe zones and places where people know they can go in times of trouble. This was really to demonstrate the power of geospatial data, demonstrate the power of local community to collect these data and to get that to government hands.
Thank you, Mel. I think, Amanda, we've probably about run out of time here. I briefly, as a bit of a wrap up here, some key items that our panelists shared with us today were considering the local context and motivations, building trust, including finding those existing relationships, and that's going to take time. That may take time, but just recognize that that's the way it goes. These projects are built around very real and specific community needs, and the scopes of work are defined well as we get the project started. Gaston shared a suggestion about identifying the most suitable academic partners, not just going to the university, but identifying those in the university that perhaps have the skills you need, but maybe not the same thematic topic areas. But it's really all about those skills and really finding the right partners. Nama shared how many examples of how he's engaged young people in ways that matter to them, but at the same time have then expanded their knowledge and understanding and really provided them and many within their community a common perspective and common understanding. And then last, as we talked about measuring success and some outcomes, it wasn't always, getting to the outcomes that were planned was certainly part of the project, but it was also recognizing, embracing, and being open to the outcomes and the spin-off effects and other things that could have a much longer term effect and really enable these projects to create sustainability for their local communities. So those are my final comments here. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all your insights. It's really been fascinating to learn more about your work, Dr. Barlow, to hear more of your insights and thoughts from Dr. Mbonglou and Dr. Budhathoki and Dr. Laituri, as always. Amanda, thank you so much for the opportunity, and any final words from our host here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Laura. This has been a really wonderful panel, and I'm so glad that we were able to come together like this today. And I think maybe the final perspective that I'll leave you with is a personal one for me, which is that when I was a part of the Secondary Cities initiative, I don't know if I could be considered a young person still anymore, but maybe back then I was. And the opportunities that were afforded me from participating in an initiative like that is not really something that is quantifiable. And because of my experiences in the secondary cities, I can say that for sure it's changed the entire course of my life. So really what I want to emphasize here is the huge things that we can accomplish by supporting our young people and our early career sustainability practitioners to succeed. And the last example I want to give is that, you know, the Secondary Cities Initiative gave me the ability to go to Accra, Ghana for one of our technical exchanges. And that had a huge impact on my life. And we were taken out to look at some of the community challenges by some of the OpenStreetMap team there. And one person that we worked with while we were there, his name is Chris Yushin. We're still working together. He was our panelist yesterday on a whole new research call that we're developing called Future Leaders to support our early career researchers. And he gave this wonderful perspective. And he's still in Accra, you know, he had effects from secondary cities, even though he wasn't a part of our project. And that effect is continuing to live on today, and he's doing important work for his local government. So it all continues. So I think my final words here would just be to keep supporting the next generations as much as you can. And even if those results are sort of intangible, they really do have long-lasting effects. And because of that, I have to thank all of you who have supported me along my journey going forward. Thank you so much. You have had a major impact on my life, and just thank you so much. I want to leave it there, but it's been a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. The session was recorded. It will be accessible through the session page in about 2 hours. So if you want to share that with your friends or family, feel free.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, SRI.